War is always brutal, but there might have been times in history where people have looked back at the weapons we've used in past wars and said, yeah, that was pretty messed up, even by war standards. That's how we got the United Nations Convention on Prohibitions or Restrictions on the Use of Certain Conventional Weapons which may be deemed to be excessively injurious or have indiscriminate effects, or Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons for short, or CCW for even shorter. The CCW serves to restrict the use of weapons seen as too brutal and too cruel for modern warfare, and anyone caught using these weapons is guilty of war crimes. But considering some of the horrifying weapons militaries have developed and used on one another throughout the thousands of years of human warfare, which weapons did the UN consider a bridge too far? Thankfully, it won't be that hard to find out, as all the banned weapons have been separated into 5 protocols. We'll break down some of these protocols and discuss some of the horrifying reasons each of these rules needed to be made in the first place. Protocol 1 applies to non-detectable fragments. It isn't against the law of war to use some fragmentation weapons. For example, the fragmentation or frag grenade has been a military staple for decades, and it's still common in use among soldiers today. Frag grenades have a very simple core principle. They're made of a metal casing designed to split into smaller pieces of shrapnel, with the explosive force from within the grenade superheating that shrapnel and firing it out in all directions at incredible speed. With some miraculous exceptions, the result of a frag grenade going off next to a human is pretty much always the same. If the explosion doesn't kill them, the massive bodily trauma of being shredded by the shrapnel will lead to a pretty quick death. In the cases of those lucky, or depending on the situation, unlucky enough to survive the blasts, X-rays can be used to detect the fragments so that field medics or surgeons can remove them if possible. In the eyes of the UN, this is all good sport, but Protocol 1 of the CCW forbids explosives or ammunition designed to harm its victims through fragments that are impossible to be detected with magnets or X-rays. Some bombs have historically used plastic or glass as their fragmentation element, rather than metal. When superheated and fired into the body at great speeds, glass and plastic are just as painful and deadly as metal fragments, but are impossible to detect with an X-ray, and thus are impossible to operate out of a surviving victim. This sets a precedent for the kind of things the CCW forbids. Weapons of war should be designed to kill, not maim and mutilate. Weapons that seem excessively cruel, such as ones that leave survivors in an extended or permanent state of pain and suffering, should not be used. There's another qualifier that sends a weapon into war crime territory, but we'll get into that later. Another weapon banned from warfare by Protocol 1 of the CCW is frangible bullets. These special bullets are designed in some cases to prevent the danger of a ricochet occurring. These bullets are subject to brittle failure, where they disintegrate on impact, becoming countless tiny projectiles rather than one large one. But these bullets have a secondary effect. Beyond preventing a ricochet occurring, as outlined in the study, effects of a fragmenting handgun bullet, considerations for trauma care providers by Lynn Hockey, Allison Smith, Jonathan Babin, John Hunt, Juan Duchenne, and Patrick Griefenstein. The study states, expanding or fragmenting bullets are designed to inflict significantly more tissue damage than non-deformable bullets. This type of ammunition is prohibited in international warfare on the basis that it does not serve a military advantage, but can result in excessive wounding and unnecessary suffering. There is no such ban for handgun ammunition for domestic use in most countries, including the United States. Ammunition manufacturers have recently released a fragmenting bullet that's designed to inflict a maximum amount of tissue damage. 2 horrifying facts. The bullet being described here is the radically invasive projectile, also known by the sinister acronym RIP. War is brutal, but perhaps not brutal enough to use ammo with a name that would fit right in the Grim Reaper's arsenal. With non-metal shrapnel explosives and terrifying frangible bullets out of the way, we move on to Protocol 2 of the CCW, mines, booby traps, and other devices. This protocol is a little more complicated than the first, with some parts regulating rather than outright banning certain weapons. Take, for example, landmines. These weapons are rightly infamous for the roles they played in the First and Second World Wars, as well as during the Vietnam War, where they were responsible for countless cases of deaths and mutilations of unsuspecting soldiers. But soldiers dying in war is sadly part of the job description. It's the effects these weapons have on civilians caught in the crossfire that's led to the UN strictly regulating them. If countries lay landmines during a war, when the conflict ends, they're legally obligated to deactivate and collect these mines to reduce the probability of civilian casualties during peacetime. This falls under the second category we alluded to earlier. If the weapons don't discriminate and are equally likely to injure or kill civilians or combatants, their use will likely be considered criminal. Anti-personnel mines are also subject to extremely strict regulations, as these mines are specifically designed for use against human combatants rather than vehicles. The purpose must be to kill enemy combatants. Thus, anti-personnel mines that merely wound or disfigure enemy combatants are illegal under Protocol 2. But mines are one thing, booby traps are quite another. The details around this one are particularly horrifying, as the UN lists many specific regulations against the use of booby traps, implying there have been recorded instances of all of them. When you hear the phrase booby traps, you might envision pits full of razor-sharp punji sticks in the jungles of Vietnam, or maybe Indiana Jones running away from poisoned darts, or a giant rolling boulder in some ancient underground tomb. Sadly, the reality is often a lot more gruesome. Here are a list of ways that the UN forbids booby traps being used in warfare. It's illegal to use booby traps attached to internationally recognized protective emblems, signs, or signals. For example, you can't hide a deadly trap in what looks like a Red Cross building. It's illegal to attach booby traps to sick, wounded, or dead people whom soldiers or humanitarian groups might seek to rescue or retrieve. It's illegal to booby trap burial, grave, and cremation sites, which is an advanced level of not having respect for the dead. It's illegal to booby trap medical facilities, medical equipment, medical supplies, or medical transportation. It's illegal to booby trap children's toys or other portable objects or products specially designed for the feeding, health, hygiene, clothing, or education of children. Let's just take a second to process that, because the idea that there were militaries out there booby-trapping children's toys is about as close to objectively evil as it gets. Okay, moving on. It's illegal to booby-trap food and drink, as well as kitchen utensils or appliances, except in military establishments, military locations, or military supply depots. It's illegal to booby-trap objects clearly of a religious nature, historic monuments, works of art, or places of worship which constitute the cultural or spiritual heritage of peoples, and of course, it's illegal to booby-trap animals or their carcasses. It's good that these laws are in place, given that if militaries were already doing this, we definitely needed to rein them in. We wish we could tell you things would get less depressing and horrifying from here, but that would be a bald-faced lie, unless you find people being burned to death whimsical and fun, in which case please don't take this video as a potential checklist of things you can do once you become a dictator. This is Protocol 3, prohibitions or restrictions on the use of incendiary weapons. That is to say, any weapon that uses fire or heat as their main offensive capability. If you felt a prickle of heat on your skin, please don't expect that to go away anytime soon, as we delve a little deeper into why this protocol is so important. Discovering fire is long viewed as a seminal moment in humanity's development, and we here at the Infographics Show speculate it was probably some 20 minutes or so after this discovery that someone was wondering if it could be used to kill people. From fire arrows to fiery projectiles thrown from siege weapons like catapults and trebuchets, to the terrifying Roman incendiary weapon known as Greek fire, which was used in rudimentary flamethrowers to burn down enemy ships. Fire has long been used as a tool of war, but these weapons seem positively quaint compared to the horrors of the M2 flamethrower and napalm used to burn down jungles and enemy combatants during the Vietnam War. Being burned to death is a horrible fate, far more so than being bombed or taking a bullet to the head, but that's if it kills you. You're equally likely to survive your run-in with an incendiary weapon and live the rest of your life horrifically burned, experiencing unimaginable pain and psychological stress. Another problem with incendiary weapons is that fire also tends to spread. Fire doesn't discriminate between the soldier and the civilian, between military installations and innocent homes or forests. It's the reason that the policy of completely annihilating everything that an enemy needs to wage war is known as scorched earth. Incidentally, enacting a scorched earth policy against civilians was also banned by the Geneva Convention in 1977. Strict restrictions are placed on the usage of incendiary weapons under Protocol 3. It's illegal to use incendiary weapons against civilian populations, areas, or objects, including, quote, any weapon or munition which is primarily designed to set fire to objects or to cause burn injury to persons through the action of flame, heat, or a combination thereof, produced by a chemical reaction of a substance delivered on the target. Because of fire's nature to spread uncontrollably, it's also forbidden to air-deliver incendiary weapons against military targets in the middle of highly concentrated civilian locations. Funnily enough, there are often strange and curious exceptions to some of these protocols. Take, for example, the UN's repeated attempts and chronic inability to meaningfully regulate thermobaric weapons, or vacuum bombs. These are some of the most deadly explosives out there. They're bombs containing large amounts of incendiary fuel that's released and ignited upon detonation. creating a fiery explosion that sucks the oxygen out of the air to fuel its extremely violent chemical reaction. In other words, you get obliterated while also suffocating. What a treat! These terrifying weapons are not all regulated under the CCW, in what seems to be a perfect example of the regulatory blind spots in the UN's attempts to litigate warfare. This brings us to Protocol 4, blinding laser weapons. Your reaction to that was probably, wait, the military has used blinding laser weapons? To which we say, this will not be the only existential nightmare you experience in this video. While this protocol doesn't prohibit the use of weapons against binoculars, periscopes, telescopes, and other optical equipment, nor can it penalize accidental blinding, the first article lays out, quote, "It is prohibited to employ laser weapons specifically designed as their sole combat function or as one of their combat functions to cause permanent blindness to unenhanced vision. That is, to the naked eye or to the eye with corrective eyesight devices." This brings us back to the question of what kinds of weapons the UN wanted to regulate with Protocol 4. One of the most prominent and infamous ones was the Personnel Halting and Stimulation Response Rifle, or PHASER, because even the engineers tasked with creating cutting-edge weapons for the military are still huge Star Trek nerds. But while the name is fun, the weapon is decidedly less so. It's a laser rifle designed to, quote, temporarily blind the target, but if you crank the power up a bit too high, or if you put it in careless hands, temporary blindness can very quickly become permanent. I think we speak for everyone when we say that here at the Infographics Show, we're kinda relieved that the UN is keeping weapons like this out of warfare. But this next protocol helps to regulate an element of war that can stick around for long after the war itself has ended. Protocol 5. Explosive remnants of war. We already spoke out about the danger of unexploded landmines, but this protocol hopes to both reinforce that and reduce the harm caused by unexploded cluster bombs. If you aren't familiar with the concept of the cluster bomb, it's a rather infamous weapon that's been used in countless wars since its invention during World War II. The general principle is that a cluster bomb is full of smaller bombs known as submunitions. These fall indiscriminately over the target area, exploding and carpeting a vast swath of land with deadly fire. They're extremely inhumane weapons, capable of just as easily massacring civilians as troops, but even worse, not all the submunitions explode at once. Some remain undetonated, embedded in the land, and at the constant risk of exploding or injuring civilians. It's really no question as to why the UN would have problems with them and seek to remedy their effects with litigation. Of course, the CCW isn't the only set of international laws forbidding the use of certain weapons in warfare. Before we think about the dark potential futures of warfare, let's take a quick look at a disturbing grab bag of other banned weapons. First, poisoned bullets. First invented and pioneered by the one and only Leonardo da Vinci as ballistic shells filled with sulfur and arsenic, these were some of the first weapons ever barred by an agreement between nations, the Strasbourg Agreement of 1675 between Rome and France. Not that this stopped any other nations from trying later, as the US military experimented with lacing bullets with the deadly toxin ricin during World War I. This idea thankfully never caught on. Later, the Geneva Convention forbade the use of chemical weapons and poisoned gas under the CWC, or Chemical Weapons Convention. Three particular chemical weapons that have been restricted are the nerve agent Novichok, the previously mentioned poison ricin, and the infamous sarin gas, which Syria was sanctioned for using on its own people during the Syrian civil war, despite signing the CWC in 2013. But what about biological weapons? Bioweapons aren't just exclusive to Resident Evil villains. They've been a mainstay of hundreds of different armies across millennia. Genghis Khan and the Mongols used corpses to spread disease among their enemies. Centuries later, armies in Europe during the Middle Ages catapulted the corpses of dead animals into the fortresses they were sieging, getting the people trapped inside dangerously sick. Centuries later, Europeans colonizing North America used blankets infected with smallpox to murder scores of Native Americans. Even as recently as Vietnam, the Viet Cong coated their punji sticks with human feces, making the injuries they caused extra infectious. Naturally, with our increasing understanding of the destructive potential for viral and germ warfare, it's understandable that the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention was created to prevent movies like Contagion and 28 Days Later from becoming documentaries. And of course, there are dirty bombs, a weapon whose mere mention can cause heart rates to spike. Dirty bombs fuse the worst parts of a conventional and nuclear explosive. It's a conventional bomb laced with nuclear material, essentially making it a distribution system for radiation that will sicken and kill indiscriminately over a wide area, potentially irradiating said area for decades centuries, or even millennia to come. It's also, incidentally, a lot easier to make than a standard nuclear weapon, which is why the world's nations are often a lot more worried about terrorists making them than whole countries with access to full-on nuclear warheads and the means to launch them. We've looked at the horrors of wars past that the international community has tried to prevent from repeating themselves, but weapons developments move a lot faster than international conflict legislation. That's why many have suggested a potential future Protocol 6, lethal autonomous weapons, aka Skynet-style killer robots. Yep, that's right, the UN is fully expecting weapons companies to start investing in and manufacturing autonomous weapon systems, and they're just hoping to get ahead of the curve. Hopefully it won't take a few autonomous weapons atrocities to get those laws passed. Now watch Insane Weapons Banned from Modern Warfare, or check out most insane weapons the US military is actually using today.